comes from? Yes? No? Anybody ever seen this plant before? Close, close. This is called papyrus. And paper comes from the word papyrus. And the people in Egypt made paper. And the way they did it was they used this plant. What part of the plant do you think they used? The stem, exactly. Very good. What they did was they used one this way and one, what would this be called? Vertical, right? And this is horizontal. So they laid them on top of each other and pressed them and soaked them and pressed them, put another layer on. Because I made a sheet of paper, it took about 2 weeks to make a sheet of paper. So you know that back then, you had to have something pretty important to write on a piece of paper, right? It took all that time. So this is what the paper looked like. You probably have seen papyrus paper with hieroglyphics on them. So you can see how the paper goes up and down and across. Okay, but long before we had paper on papyrus, what do you think people wrote on first? Rocks, right. People used to hammer on rocks. Now what would happen though, you know how you kids carry backpacks to school? Don't you think it got a little heavy and old after a while? Carrying, and then what would happen if you went into school every day and somebody would say to your teacher, I broke my homework? That wouldn't go over too well, would it? No, no, no. So then we had to come up with something else to make paper. So what else do you think people used to write on? They used animal skin called vellum. They used sheep and calf to write very important documents on vellum. So the people who were very wealthy or the people in the church were the only ones who were using this. Okay, so then about 2,000 years ago, 105 AD in China, there was an empress who they used to use silk to write on paper, to use as paper. So what happened was the empress asked one of the people who worked in her court to try to come up with another way of making paper. And that's sort of what we're going to do today. We're going to make it the way this man did. His name was Lin. Made paper about 2,000 years ago. He used bits of cloth, and that's what we use a lot of today to make paper. Okay, so then this way of making paper was done for over 1,000 years, and it was kept a secret. Now, how do you think people in countries found out what people in other countries were doing? By traveling, right? When they would go by ship and by horse, they would find out what other people were doing. So that's how they found out about how they made paper. Now, have you all studied the Revolutionary War? Not yet? Okay, well you will. Promise me you will. In America, in the American colonies in about 1700s, over 200 years ago, almost 300 years ago we're talking about, paper was so important that people who made paper didn't have to fight in the Revolutionary War because they had to make the documents. And about that time, there were people making paper from cloth. And there was a company called the Crane Company, and there was a very important man you'll hear about in history called Paul Revere. So what Paul Revere did, he knew these people who worked for a paper company, and he got them to make important papers for the Revolutionary War and money. So what happened is that the United States government has an arrangement with Levi Strauss to use their leftover fabric, when they make mistakes and when they cut and they have all these pieces left over, and also the pockets and t-shirts. So we have our money that's made from denim. But it's a secret on how they do it. I brought some cotton along to show you what cotton looks like when it's beaten to a pulp, and that's what I think where that expression comes from. So I'll pass them around. A lot of very good paper is made from cloth, and I'll show you. Do you ever see what a piece of paper looks like under a microscope? This is a piece of paper under a microscope that's been magnified 920 times. So paper is made from a lot of these fibers that are stuck together with water and force that I'm going to tell you about today. So that's what paper would look like if you looked at it very close and magnified 920 times. Now, after the war, and in the 1800s, people were still making paper with cloth. But guess what? We were starting to run out of cloth, right? So this is where mummies come in. Thank you. So in New England, people in New England were running out of cloth, and they imported mummies from Egypt to make paper. So they used the wrappings from around mummies. And there's a picture of a mummy. I think I saw one. Oh yeah, right there are some mummies. But unfortunately, people became sick. So they had to come up with another idea. So then, has anybody ever here seen a wasp nest? Okay. There was a Frenchman named Lavoisier visiting in America one time, and he just happened to be looking out the window, and he saw a wasp making a nest. It's very papery and thin. Not quite like this, but I think you can kind of get the picture. So what the wasp does is he chews on a tree, and then he has his chemicals in his body that he uses with the tree he's been chewing on, and he spits it out, and then he just keeps putting layer on top of layer. Pretty busy little wasp. Maybe that's why he's in a bad mood when you're going around him, because he's tired. So they build it. This isn't a wasp mill, but you get an idea. Building layer upon layer upon layer of this wood pulp. So this man, the scientist from France, said, maybe we can make paper from trees. It took over 100 years and trying with different ways, but that's how we started making paper with trees, by beating it. But as Robert was saying, we need to recycle, right? So a lot of people now are using other things to make paper. A lot of artists are doing that now too. So we're making paper from plants again. And I wanted to show you some fun examples of things you can make paper from. Have you all seen iris plants? Pretty iris flowers? Okay, well, I should have brought a picture, I didn't know. They're pretty flowers with purple or yellow leaves. And what happens when they die and then they dry, you've got these stems from the plants. So what you have to do is soak them and cook them and beat them, and you get a piece of paper that looks like this. So I'm going to pass that around. That's from iris paper. How about, what is this? Corn husk. Corn husk. You can make paper from corn husk, and this is what I made from a corn husk. Several corn husks. You have to cook it, soak it and cook it for about 3 or 4 hours and pound it, and you have paper that looks like this. So I'm going to pass this around. And that same iris I showed you here's a different kind of paper. It depends on what kind of plant it is, where you get it from, what kind of chemicals have been put on the plant, how long you cook it. Does anybody have a eucalyptus tree in their yard? Okay, you know how the bark comes off? And this is a great way for kids and adults to learn about nature. This is made from egg cartons. And I call it Mexican omelet paper because it has dried chili peppers in it, and tomatoes and herbs. And I made it round to look like an omelet. So you can use egg cartons to make paper. And you can use different shapes to make papers. So I'll pass this around. This is made from grocery bags and also fabric. So you can recycle paper that way. You can use cookie cutters. You can use cookie cutters to make paper and put hole punches. And you can also, I'm sure you've heard of this person and his pet, you can also put pictures in paper. Who is this? Yes? I'll show you how you can put pictures in paper today. So, let's see. This is paper made with, I grated some lemon peel and put some lemon sticks, some cinnamon sticks in. That's some paper. You could use, when you sharpen your colored pencils, you can put your this in to decorate your paper. Bring it in. You can use the repeat function on your computer. You can put in someone's name. You could put Happy Mother's Day or I love you, Dad. You can put a person's name in to put in the paper. You can also make paper with banana peels in it. I don't have it handy, but if I find it, I'll show it to you. You can also make a sculpture. You can use it magnetic poetry. Here's a card you can make. Remember I was telling you about the seasons? And then this I made with paper bags and leaves. So you could put all kinds of things. So it's a great way to look at nature and try to experiment, because that's what an artist does, right? There was one artist I heard of who learned to ride a tractor. And what she did was she made some paper pulp and she drove the tractor through the pulp so that she could have the tracks from the tires on the paper. So I'm going to move these things out of the way, and then I'm going to show you how to make paper. Then you're going to make your own paper, okay? What we're going to have is a blender. So if you use one of these at home, it's a good idea to have either two or use one separate one for your artwork and one for your food, right? That's the safe thing to do. And you don't want to get this too wet. That's why it's good to have somebody around to help you. All right. So remember we were talking about paper. Your mom and dad get all those credit card mailings in the mail, and you get all kinds of things asking you for money, and yeah, you know how that is. So, and all kinds of mail that you don't want, and you put it in your recycling bag, right? So the other thing you could do is tear it up. Okay, so you can use mail as long as it's not shiny. You could, newspaper isn't a good idea because it has so much acid in it, it'll become brittle and fall apart soon. So you can use computer paper, fax paper, it's not too shiny. You can use construction paper, which is what I use today. So, some people even put bubble gum wrappers in their paper. So, you tear up paper, you see how small it is. Yes?
Could you use candy wrappers?
As long as they're not so shiny. But you need other things in there first. You can use it to decorate it, and I'll tell you about that. So you get a handful of paper, maybe 2 handfuls of paper. Okay, you fill it with water. Okay, you put the lid on, and you make sure the lid is on so that the water doesn't come sprouting all over the place. And then you turn it on, and we're going to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So you see how it looks? So then you put it again. What happens if I want to make, I can put some wheat in. I could put some flowers in.